James, good morning. Thank you for joining us. How are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm doing great, thank you. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. We're glad you're here. So Colchester, England has a population of 186,000 people, and I looked at Tallahassee, we're at like 191, which fluctuates when students are here. But we've talked about storytelling this morning, and you're a fantastic storyteller as well. But I want everyone to have insights into how somebody from Colchester, England, comes to Tallahassee, Florida, 2 years ago to build the program you built. So why don't you give us some insights and tell that story?
Yeah, sure. So I suppose going way back to when I first started university in England, it was in my hometown, Colchester. I did a sports science degree, which is kind of a bit like PE, but a little bit more advanced. But so I started out really not having a clue what I was going to be doing. I knew I would like sport. I wanted to work in sport, but wasn't really sure what I was going to be up to. And I guess I got inspired by a movie, like the cringiest way possible, I guess. But you know when you watch like a Rocky film, and you decide the next day you're going to start your training to become a professional boxer. I had that same sort of inspiration by the film Moneyball, and like every time you watch Rocky, you wake up the next morning, you're like, no, that was ridiculous. You sleep until 10:30, and that dream's over. But the day after I watched Moneyball, we actually had a talk from I think it was the head of analysis and recruitment for my local team, Colchester United, and he was looking for volunteers. So I kind of felt like that was fate. So I decided to volunteer my time, just doing sort of part-time, part-time voluntary work, and it kind of snowballed from there, really. I started working for Norwich and later with the FA, and I remember finishing up my undergraduate degree and sort of deciding what is going to be the next step. I wanted to look at a full-time role in the field, and I was applying for some different jobs, and I remember I saw a position advertised for Florida State as a performance analyst, and I looked at it and I thought, okay, that's a bit strange, but I just ignored it. And later that day, my mum sent me the exact same job advert, and I was like, okay, I'll apply for it. I know it's kind of a foreign idea for all the Americans in the room, but back then I had no idea about college sports at all. I'd never heard of Florida State before. It was just a completely foreign concept. So in my head, it was just an experience of going to America and seeing what's happening over there. And as I spoke to the staff and started to understand how high a tier the women's soccer game is over here, I got more and more excited about it. And I just sort of ended up here, I guess.
And so you have a passion for football, for soccer. Love it. I've seen that in how you go about your work. When you talk about your first, I don't know if it's a week or month, but so you get here, and now the coaches are looking at you. You're from Premier League. You work for the English football. They're looking at you. They want data. Mm-hmm. How did it start? Did they have questions right off the bat, or did they just let you do your own thing?
Yeah, so it was really interesting, actually. When I first got here, I was so surprised at the level the coaches were using analysis already. I mean, in all of my previous roles, I've been more of a video analyst than a data analyst. They usually get sort of branched into the same role, just called a performance analyst. But all my previous roles have been breaking down video and showing clips to the players and staff and using that for team breakdowns and things like that. When I got here, all the coaches were already doing that. And they sort of sat me down and were like, go, start. And I was like, I don't know, you're doing everything that I've already done. So it kind of gave me a blank canvas to move more into the data side, which I didn't have a lot of experience with before, but I've been given a lot of time to just experiment and try and create some different things. And I found a really exciting opportunity.
What is the one metric that you think changes the game or I know what it is, but I'm trying to draw it out of you. What's that one metric that we talked about?
Yeah, it's called expected goals. So it's like I suppose it's worked its way into the mainstream now. But I mean, before you look at the Moneyball sort of scenario with baseball and how, I mean, obviously the movie dramatized it, but that quote when they're talking about how to evaluate players and Jonah Hill, I can't remember the actual real guy's name, was like, we want to get it down to one number. And that was always my ambition, I guess, was to find that Moneyball number for soccer. And you just kind of realize the more you work how ridiculous that idea is and how impossible it is. I think this metric called expected goals is probably the closest thing to it, because as opposed to looking at just shots and goals and shots on target, you're actually putting a bit more context in and saying, right, for every shot we take, what's the exact probability of you scoring based on all of these different variables about the shot. So it's not so much the most game-changing metric, but it's definitely the most in-depth and gives you the most information down to one number. I think the field's starting to catch up and doing a lot of different things, and there's some new really cool metrics coming out which are starting to change the game. I know Liverpool have very recently released that they're really basing all their recruitment off of one metric alone. It's like a possession value metric, which is really intense and in detail, which is kind of cool, and I think everyone else is slowly starting to catch up, but yeah.
And over here, being at Florida State, we have one of the top women's programs, not only in the country, but in the world, with the coaching staff's able to do the type of player they can get. And I know one of the challenges that comes up initially is we can't gather data fast enough. Is that true for expected shot in the women's game?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you look at, it's a tough scenario, this one, because for the lower leagues, especially, I'll try and relate it back into English football. I mean, for sort of the fourth tier and below, they're not at the position where they can really afford to get people to collect the data for them. They're sort of doing a little bit themselves, but they're more focused on the video aspect. As you get higher up the tier system, you have big third-party companies that will do all the data collection for you, and then you have all your time to just sit down and look at it and analyze it and do different things with it. Over here, it's more of a scenario of, right, well, we've got a very high level of playing. No one's collecting any data for you, so you have to do it yourself, and then you have to analyze it, and then you have to visualize it and things like that. It's kind of a lot of roles combined into one, which is tricky, but it gives me an appreciation for all the different phases in it, I guess.
That's an intensive process. So I know, tell the audience a little bit about your day of game process, because I know you have to watch the game, you have to tag it, get the video, and then you do activities after. It's a long day, isn't it?
Yeah, it can be long days, yeah. I'd say during the game we're like live coding it, so we're just breaking down the game into different categories of video. We'll show any relevant video to the coaches on the bench. We can send it to them on an iPad, or we'll save some clips to show the team at halftime. And after the game is where it gets a bit more of the dirty work, where it's really long hours and you're sitting down, you're watching the whole game back, and sort of you're essentially watching it 2 or 3 times over, going through every single player's involvement. You're recording every single action they do, sometimes like the locations of every single action, and it can get really tricky. And in terms of the time spent, the coaches. I remember when I was working at Norwich, we did a sort of a less intense version of the player analysis, and we played our games on Monday nights, and they wanted this done by Friday. And here it's, right, we play our games, say it was on Mondays nights, they want it by Tuesday morning, so they can sit down with the players and show the players that day. So it's a quick turnaround, it's some long nights, but I think it's worthwhile when you see all the data being used. So,
is it satisfying seeing your work go into what Florida State does?
Yeah, I think so. The satisfaction comes from having an insight from data, relaying it to the coaches, and seeing that affect training or playing style. I think that's the biggest one. It's not, you can't just, if you're driven by seeing how it affects how they play in general, then you're just going to throw any random theory, but you have to make sure it's for the best of for the better of the team and for the better of the playing style itself.
Did you already have an idea for the visualization when you started down this path, or did you work with the coaches? What was that like?
Yeah, that was an interesting one as well, because I used to, I'd collect the data, I'd take it out and do different things with it, and every time I showed the coaches different visualizations, they'd be like, okay, can you show us the video for this? And I was like, okay, all right, I'll go back and look for it, and then every single time it was, right, let's see the video for this, and that kind of rewired me to think about building the visualizations in the software that we use to collect the data, and that way you could just show your visualizations, and at the touch of a button, it shows all the video for them. So it's more of a coaching tool now, as well as just a data visualization, which is kind of handy.
Are there any skills you had to pick up during this process in order to talk about that?
Yeah. As I said, I wasn't really that data savvy before I came here. I've tried my best to just get stuck in and learn different things with it, and especially with the the output windows that we make, which is the visualizations that are linked with the video. Before I came to Florida State, I really had no idea of how to make them, so it was a lot of learning on the job and understanding the scripting element, which is like the coding that I'm sure a lot of you in here will know about. But for me, it was a foreign thing, and I had to pick it up as I went along.
What are some of the pleasant surprises that you've experienced coming over and taking on this opportunity?
Oh, I mean, as I said, I really didn't know what I was walking into when I applied for the position. For me, a lot of it was going to America and having that next step, and I could have easily ended up in some D2 school in the middle of nowhere, and I'm sure there's not too many D2 schools recruiting a performance analyst, but at the end of the day, I really didn't know what I was walking into, and I just happened to be walking into that year the best team in the country, and we walked in and managed to win the national championship that year. So that was a great surprise. Yeah.
Oh, that was phenomenal. Is our program, are we ahead of other D1 schools as far as having a performance analyst like you, or have you come across people like you?
Yeah, I think it's pretty rare, to be honest. I think it's mainly the professional game that has this sort of level of analysis. Most of it's done by the coaches, and that's more of a resource issue, I guess. To my best of knowledge, there isn't any employed performance analysts in college soccer at all. Sometimes they'll sort of be joined with a director of operations, or there's not a job for it at the moment. So it's kind of Florida State were definitely one of the first ones to get ahead of this, and I think as time goes on, it's going to become more common. But
have your data stories, have you been able to see where they've impacted or influenced the program of how they've grown in the last 2 years?
Yeah, so one of the big messages, and it's probably the easiest messages for an analyst to come in and working with a team who haven't used an analyst before, is one of the key messages is shot quality and shot distances and things like that, and that's one of the easiest things to measure and quantify. So we're just looking at moving our general shot taking closer to goal, and it's just a case of being more efficient with the ball, and that's something that we can measure, and we've seen a huge decrease in the average distance to goal over the course of the 2 years that I've been here, which is a nice little thing to put on the resume, I guess.
It's exciting just to get some insights, and then I want to peel it open, and then we'll have time maybe for one or two questions. When we talked maybe about 6 months ago in the Sports Analytics Club, Innovation Hub, you came over and watched where the team meets, and you see how even the club's partnering with other groups on campus, and you had an idea for virtual reality around decision making. Talk a little bit about that opportunity.
Well, it wasn't actually my idea. It was Director of Operations Nathan Minion, who works the soccer team, and he's just full of great ideas. He's non-stop coming out with them, and one of them was looking at using virtual reality to essentially recreate our game scenarios, and as opposed to just one of the issues with showing players coaching tools on video is you're getting it from the sideline point of view. You're asking them to understand what's happening from that view, and then understand it, translate it, and then change how they play the game with their view, which is completely different. So one of the ideas was looking at recreating a coaching point from the sideline point of view, putting it into virtual reality where they can literally put the VR on and recreate their exact scenario and seeing if you can coach from there.
So that's in conceptual mode, but do you think that's right? Is that around the corner? Is that near term?
Yeah, I think there's companies that do it. It's kind of early days at the moment, so it's very, very expensive.
The data we're gathering, could that be an input into that process?
Not quite yet, no.
Okay.
You need quite advanced coordinates and tracking data and things like that. But
which is great. Part of the data science project is now you see maybe an opportunity with VR. Now you'd have to go through and figure out what data to gather and put that,
exactly.
You and I talked about 2 years ago about how to go about gathering data, and that's where we were able to collaborate.
You want to look at your end goal and then kind of work backwards from there. So again, it's down, you walk in, there's not a sort of a best practice how-to guide of how to do analysis at a club. You need to get an understanding of their strengths and weaknesses and their playing styles, and then you kind of work backwards from there. So there's no point in measuring how well a team presses if they never actually press. So it's a case of understanding how they play and then finding out what's actually relevant to that.
You're I've had a chance to get to know you the last 2 years. You're very seasoned and professional for where you're at in your career because you're on the front end. Like me, I just started yesterday. So I want you to give some wisdom, though, because your story is impactful. It's even inspired me. Talk to the audience about how you go about finding your passion, maybe, and building that path that you can go down that.
Yeah, I guess it just stems from where it all started. Originally it was, I knew I wanted to work in sport, and anyone who's in here who wants to work in sport will appreciate how hard it is to work in sport. For me, analysis in soccer was very niche. There was nowhere to learn to do it. There's no courses to do it. They're starting to pop up now, but when I was there was no university courses and things like that. It was something that you just had to kind of get experience and learn on the job and then go from there. So for me, it was kind of the easiest way into sports. And then I always thought maybe I'd branch off and do something else from there. But as I've learned more about it, I appreciate how powerful it can be. And it gives me, I guess my motivation comes from giving real experts in the game, like some of the coaches that I've worked with are like incredible knowledge, like incredible. But if you can give them a bit of information that they didn't otherwise have, I think that's all the motivation you need.
That's fantastic. We have time for one question, so I'm going to look over. Anyone over here have a question? Yes, sir.
I have a paper I wrote that you're very interested in building an expected goals model, one. Two, there is a very interesting research paper finalist that's going to be presenting at Sloan in a couple weeks that gives you tracking data using a sideline view and gathers coordinate data just using a single view. It's pretty high tech. It'll be useful for you. How many features are you actually using in your expected goals model? And have you built it?
Yeah.
The question is how many features, attributes in your expected goals model, and how do you use it?
So I'd say for majority of the expected goals models used at different clubs is based on Opta data, who are the main data providers. They sort of use a data set that's based on so many variables, and everyone sort of gets the same. When I walked into Norwich, they've been collecting their own shot data in-house for, I think, 4 or 5 years. So we ended up having over 10,000 shots, and it was just sort of sitting there. And I remember the lead analyst at the time saying that they kind of have all the pieces. The last thing that they want is an expected goals model, and that was my motivation to go home and learn how to do it and how to build it. So I spent 6 months sort of learning the more detailed stats side of that, and I managed to build an expected goals model using their data. So that's like private data. It's all collected in-house, and then for that reason there's different variables as opposed to the standard Opta data. So we probably have, I don't know, seven different variables that go into. So you're looking at shot, you'll say, right, where's the location? What was the assist type? Was it a through ball or a cross? Because that massively affects how likely you are to score. Was it a header or a foot? And then we're starting to look at more niche variables like, did the assist and the shot happen on opposite sides of the field in terms of cutting it vertically? All these different variables have slightly small effects, but all put together gives you a really good sense of how likely you are to score from that one opportunity.
Awesome. James, it's great just getting to know you. You're doing awesome work, and please help me thank James for spending time with us this morning.